He's hurting me. Please. The message left her phone at 22:11, sent to a number she'd accidentally saved months ago during her shift at Hotel Meridian's restaurant. Her trembling fingers had pressed send before logic could intervene, desperation overriding reason as she crumpled against the Victorian wallpaper. The response came with unexpected swiftness, lighting up her screen with 5 words that changed everything. Stay still. 12 minutes. She blinked at the timestamp. 22:11, then at the stranger's promise, wondering if salvation could truly arrive in the space between heartbeats. Rain pelted against the windows of room 407, creating a rhythm like nervous fingers drumming against glass. The abat-jour flickered with the building's ancient wiring, casting distorted shadows across the red carpet where her phone had fallen moments before. The businessman across from her, Eureka Springs' golden investor with political aspirations and vengeful hands, tilted his head with predatory curiosity. His knuckles whitened around his crystal tumbler of whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing against the sides like tiny waves before a storm. Another message illuminated her screen. Do not move. Leave the curtains open. She obeyed instantly, edging toward the window as if drawn by invisible strings, her spine pressed against the cool glass, while rain traced patterns on the other side. Her attacker laughed, a sound like ice cracking, as he loosened his Italian silk tie with practiced efficiency. Running to the window won't save you, he said, misreading her actions as an escape attempt rather than compliance with her unseen protector's commands. Time stretched like taffy, each minute expanding into infinity as the clock's red digits changed with excruciating slowness. Her heartbeat counted seconds in triple time, while her mind calculated distance, wondering how far 12 minutes could carry someone through Eureka's winding, rain-slicked streets. The businessman began unbuckling his belt, the leather sliding through loops with a sound like a snake slithering across fallen leaves. No one knows you're here, he reminded her, his voice carrying the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to getting away with everything. A knock interrupted them, 3 soft taps against the door, so gentle they barely registered above the storm. The man's expression shifted from desire to annoyance, then to suspicion as he stalked across the room, muttering curses under his breath. When he yanked open the door, the hallway appeared empty. A momentary illusion shattered when a man in an impeccable charcoal suit materialized from the shadows. No words were exchanged as the newcomer stepped inside, his presence immediate and absolute as fog rolling over mountains. The businessman's protest died in his throat as recognition dawned in his eyes, the kind of recognition that comes too late to be useful. 2 swift movements later, he lay motionless on the carpet, the power he'd wielded seconds before evaporating like morning mist. The Mafia boss, for that's what he was, though newspapers never printed his name, turned toward her with eyes that held neither triumph nor regret. It's over, he stated simply, extending a hand that promised more than immediate safety. Her rescuer checked his watch. Exactly 12 minutes had passed since her desperate text. As they walked silently to his waiting car, the storm washing away any evidence of their encounter, she realized some promises were kept with deadly precision. The black sedan cut through the night, headlights illuminating the curved roads leading down from Hotel Meridian's hilltop perch. Neither spoke, as raindrops created constellations across the windshield, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. As they drove past Eureka's thermal springs, steam rising like ghosts in the midnight air, she finally understood the weight of what had happened. Her accidental text had created an unbreakable thread between them, a connection forged in 12 minutes of terror, and sealed with an act that could never be undone. 2 days earlier, she had been nothing more than a hard-working waitress at Hotel Meridian's restaurant, balancing trays and university textbooks with equal determination. Customers rarely looked at her face, their eyes gliding past her as if she were merely an extension of the hotel's antique furniture. The businessman had been different. His eyes followed her with the intensity of someone appraising valuable art. He'd left excessive tips beneath crystal glasses, each folded bill accompanied by a business card, and an invitation she'd politely declined 3 times already. That evening, as she'd served the private dining room where Eureka's elite gathered, she'd noticed something unusual. Men with expressionless faces and bulges beneath their jackets, positioned too strategically for coincidence. Her eyes had briefly met those of a quiet man in the corner, a warning passing between them without words. The quiet man had nodded almost imperceptibly, then disappeared before the dessert course arrived. Later, she'd overheard hotel security discussing a situation avoided, a phrase that made her hands tremble as she'd entered his number from the bill into her phone, a strange impulse she couldn't explain. For weeks afterward, she'd sensed eyes on her, not threatening, but watchful, as she'd walked home through Eureka's fog-laden evenings. Occasionally, a black car would appear at street corners, vanishing when she turned to look directly at it, like a guardian shadow testing boundaries. When the businessman had cornered her in the empty hotel corridor that morning, his invitation had transformed into a demand. "Room 407, 9 o'clock, he'd whispered, his breath hot against her ear as his fingers dug into her wrist, leaving marks she'd later cover with her uniform sleeve. Fear had wrapped around her throat like hands, tightening with each hour that ticked toward 9. She'd considered calling the police, but the businessman's connections with local authorities were well known, whispered about by hotel staff who'd seen previous complaints mysteriously disappear. Her decision to meet him had been born of calculation rather than compliance, a desperate attempt to record evidence on her phone, to finally escape the growing threat that followed her through every shift. The taser in her purse had given her false confidence that evaporated the moment he'd taken it from her. She hadn't recognized the quiet man from the corner table in the businessman's descriptions of his competition, men he claimed to have ruined through Eureka's political machinery. But something in his tone when mentioning that outsider who thinks he owns the Springs had sparked recognition in her memory. The connection had formed in her mind like lightning. The quiet man who'd nodded to her was the outsider, the competitor, the man the businessman had tried to ambush that night in the private dining room. The realization had hit just as the businessman's hand had struck her face, sending her phone skittering across the floor. Her fingers had moved without conscious thought, typing those 4 desperate words to the number she'd saved months ago, not expecting a response, certainly not expecting salvation, just reaching blindly into darkness, hoping someone might reach back. When he'd arrived exactly 12 minutes later, she'd seen not just a rescuer, but a mirror, someone else who understood the power of observation, of silence, of waiting for the perfect moment, someone who recognized her silent strength because he carried the same within himself. The businessman's body had disappeared by morning, another Eureka mystery swallowed by the surrounding Ozark forests. Hotel staff whispered about his sudden departure from town, but their eyes held relief rather than concern when they shared the news during morning shift change. Room 407 had been thoroughly cleaned by housekeeping staff who didn't question the extra payment or the instructions to replace the carpet. By evening, new guests occupied the space, never knowing what the walls had witnessed, or how destiny had pivoted on 4 desperate words. Her life had fractured neatly into before and after. Before, the text that connected her to a stranger who dealt in shadows, and after, when those shadows became her unlikely sanctuary from the daylight dangers she'd never noticed until they'd nearly consumed her. The businessman had built his reputation on transforming Eureka Springs from a sleepy tourist town into a luxury destination for the wealthy. Local newspapers praised his vision while conveniently overlooking the small businesses that mysteriously failed after declining his partnership offers. His charitable donations to Eureka's Historical Preservation Society had earned him a key to the city, displayed prominently in his office beside photographs of hunting trips, trophies of both animals and politicians captured through his expensive camera lens. The images revealed his true nature, to those who looked closely enough. Women who worked at his properties learned to travel in pairs, to avoid end-of-day meetings, to laugh off comments that made their skin crawl. Those who didn't follow these unwritten rules often left town suddenly, their departures explained away as better opportunities elsewhere. Hotel Meridian had been his latest acquisition, a century-old landmark he'd promised to restore to glory, while quietly replacing long-term staff with people who understood discretion was more valuable than experience. The restaurant where she worked was the only department still employing original staff. His interest in her had begun with casual observation, escalated to accidental encounters, and finally transformed into ownership entitlement when she'd continued rejecting his advances. "I always acquire what improves my collection," he'd told her that night, gesturing around room 407 as if she were simply another antique to restore. What he hadn't known, couldn't have known, was that his greatest rival had been watching him for months, cataloging weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate the competition. The waitress had unknowingly accelerated a collision course set in motion, long before that rainy night. The businessman had created enemies throughout the Ozarks with expansion plans that threatened established territories, crossing invisible boundaries that existed on no official map, but were respected by those who understood the region's true power structure. His political aspirations had made him careless, visible, vulnerable. His last mistake had been assuming the quiet man's absence from Eureka meant retreat rather than strategic patience. He's gone back to Chicago with his tail between his legs, he'd boasted to associates at the hotel bar, loud enough for serving staff to overhear and report back to interested parties. When he'd grabbed the waitress's arm that morning, security cameras had captured the interaction, footage that traveled through encrypted channels to a penthouse office where the quiet man watched with narrowed eyes. The businessman had inadvertently provided the perfect catalyst for his own removal. The businessman had chosen room 407 for its isolation at the end of the hallway, for its balcony overlooking dense forest rather than the main street, for walls thick enough to muffle sounds beneath the constant white noise of the building's ancient plumbing. He'd used the room before for similar negotiations. He hadn't expected her resistance, the taser she'd brought, the recording app activated on her phone, the knee that had connected briefly with his groin before he'd overpowered her. His surprise had quickly transformed into rage, his carefully cultivated public mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath. What he'd failed to calculate was the true value of the waitress to his rival, not as a romantic interest but as an unexpected ally who'd once saved the quiet man without realizing it. In the underworld's complex accounting of debts and payments, she'd earned protection she'd never thought to claim. The businessman's body was discovered 3 weeks later in a ravine 30 miles outside Eureka Springs. His death ruled an accident by investigators who didn't look too closely at inconsistencies in the evidence. Local papers ran respectful obituaries highlighting his contributions to the community. His properties transferred to a holding company with Chicago connections, management changing hands with minimal disruption to daily operations. Hotel Meridian continued welcoming guests, its restaurant now under the supervision of a new owner who rarely visited but whose influence permeated every corner. The waitress sometimes felt his absence like a phantom pain, the threat gone, but the memory lingering in certain rooms, certain shadows. But whenever that sensation returned, a black car would appear in her peripheral vision, a silent reminder that some threats could be neutralized permanently by sending 4 desperate words to the right stranger. The black sedan stopped at a secluded cabin nestled among towering pines, far from Eureka's tourist trails and curious eyes. Rain drummed against the wooden roof as the Mafia boss led her inside with a gentleness that contradicted the calculated efficiency he displayed in room 407. A crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows across rustic walls adorned with minimalist artwork, landscapes of the Ozarks painted in muted colors that captured the region's mysterious beauty. The cabin smelled of cedar and coffee. Comfortable without being luxurious, secure without feeling like a prison. The Mafia boss moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd calculated every variable, every possible threat, before she'd even sent her desperate text. "You're safe here," he said, the first complete sentence he'd spoken since their departure from Hotel Meridian. She noticed his hands as he prepared tea, strong but precise, the same hands that had neutralized her attacker without hesitation, now carefully measuring leaves into a ceramic pot. These contradictions fascinated her, the gentle movements of someone capable of such swift violence. "3 months ago you saved my life," he stated, placing a steaming cup before her. "You noticed the men positioned near my table, their hands positioned too close to hidden weapons, their eyes meeting too frequently across the room." Her memory flashed to that evening, the private dining room, the tension she couldn't name but had instinctively recognized. "I just moved your table when you requested it," she whispered, realizing now that her simple act of accommodation had disrupted an ambush. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You suggested the alcove by the kitchen instead of the window seat they'd reserved for me, claimed it had a better view of the springs at night. That small change disrupted months of planning by my competitors." The businessman had been behind that setup, she realized with sudden clarity, the same man who'd later cornered her in the hallway. The same man now lying cold somewhere in Eureka's forested hills. Her inadvertent interference had made her both savior and target. The Mafia boss showed her security footage on his laptop, cameras she hadn't known existed capturing her interaction with the businessman that morning, his grip on her wrist, the threat implicit in his posture. "We were already watching him, but today he accelerated my timeline." She shivered despite the cabin's warmth, understanding that the quiet man had been observing from a distance long before her text. "Why keep my number all this time?" she asked, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup to steady herself against this new reality. His answer was pragmatic rather than romantic. "I keep track of everyone who's either a potential threat or a potential ally." He paused, studying her with those observant eyes. You proved yourself the latter without even trying. Outside, the storm intensified, branches scratching against windows like fingers seeking entrance. The Mafia boss checked security monitors periodically, small screens revealing the cabin's perimeter, the long driveway, the surrounding forest where armed men patrolled in shifting patterns. She should have been terrified by these revelations, by the methodical violence that had saved her, by the unseen web of surveillance that had captured her within its threads. Instead, she felt an unsettling calm, as if she'd stumbled into a world that operated on rules more honest than the ones she'd left behind. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing everything from immediate plans to the longer trajectory of a life now irrevocably altered. Her university classes, her apartment in town, her carefully constructed normalcy, all seemed to belong to someone else's story. The Mafia boss considered her question with the same attention he'd given everything else. "That depends on what you want," he replied, offering choice where the businessman had demanded compliance, the fundamental difference between power that corrupts and power that protects. The first light of dawn filtered through pine branches as she woke on the cabin's leather couch, a handcrafted quilt tucked around her shoulders. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place the unfamiliar ceiling, the sound of birds instead of Eureka's early morning traffic. Her phone, wiped clean of fingerprints and location data by her silent protector, showed a notification, a news alert about the businessman's unexpected departure from Eureka Springs. The article mentioned a family emergency in another state, the perfect cover story constructed while she'd slept. She found the Mafia boss on the cabin's wraparound porch, steam rising from his coffee cup as he surveyed his domain with watchful eyes. "Your life in town can resume tomorrow if that's what you want," he said without preamble, his profile silhouetted against the misty forest backdrop. She considered his words, the implicit choice they contained: return to her previous existence, or accept the fork in her path created by 12 minutes of intervention. "And if that's not what I want?" she asked, surprising herself with the question that rose unbidden to her lips. His expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in his posture, a minute tensing of shoulders before deliberate relaxation. "Then we discuss alternatives," he replied, the simple statement containing complex implications neither was ready to fully articulate. The morning passed in practical discussions of security, new locks for her apartment, surveillance cameras disguised as ordinary objects, a panic button disguised as a decorative pin she could wear daily. Each precaution further bound their fates together in invisible threads. At noon, one of his men arrived with clothes from her apartment, items selected with surprising thoughtfulness, including the textbooks for her Monday classes and the half-finished paper due next week. The respect for her existing life touched her more deeply than grand gestures could have. "We found these in his office," the Mafia boss said later, sliding a folder across the kitchen table. Inside were photographs of her, leaving work, shopping downtown, studying in the park, a stalker's collection that made her stomach clench with belated terror. His hand covered hers briefly when she tried to close the folder, the contact electric and grounding simultaneously. "Look at them," he instructed gently, "not to cause pain but to understand what you've escaped. Knowledge is protection, even when it hurts." She forced herself to examine each image, to confront the predatory gaze that had tracked her movements for months without her knowledge. With each photograph, her fear transformed into something stronger, a determination that such vulnerability would never be her reality again. 12 minutes, she murmured, remembering his precise response time from the night before. How did you reach Hotel Meridian so quickly? The question had been circling her mind since their escape, a mathematical impossibility unless he'd already been nearby. The Mafia boss's smile contained no warmth, only efficiency. "I was 3 minutes away when your message came through, conducting business with a restaurant owner who needed convincing about new supplier arrangements. Your timing was fortunate." She wondered how many lives had been altered in 12-minute increments by this man who moved through the world like a calculating shadow. How many threats neutralized, how many alliances formed, how many debts collected or paid in the space between heartbeats. That evening, he taught her to shoot, his hands positioning her arms with clinical precision, his voice calm as he explained pressure and recoil, his body close enough that she could feel his controlled breathing against her back. The lesson was practical rather than intimate, yet something shifted between them with each bullet that found its target. His phone rang just as darkness settled over the mountains, a brief conversation in a language she didn't recognize, ending with a single nod that seemed to confirm something inevitable. "It's time," he told her afterward, watching her reaction with those perceptive eyes. They returned to Eureka Springs after nightfall, the town's Victorian architecture glowing under amber streetlights that barely penetrated the persistent fog. The Mafia boss drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the console between them, close but not touching, available but not demanding. Hotel Meridian loomed on its hilltop like a watchful sentinel, windows illuminated in patterns that told stories to those who knew how to read them. Instead of approaching the main entrance, the black sedan circled to a service road leading to an unmarked door, monitored by security cameras. A man in hotel maintenance uniform nodded respectfully as they entered, leading them through a labyrinth of narrow corridors that smelled of industrial cleaners and old wood. These were the arteries of the hotel, invisible to guests, but vital to its functioning, much like the Mafia boss himself. The service elevator carried them silently to the top floor, opening onto a penthouse suite that bore little resemblance to the Victorian aesthetic maintained throughout the rest of the building. Here, modern minimalism reigned, clean lines, subtle technology, and windows offering commanding views of the town below. 5 men awaited their arrival, their expressions revealing nothing, as the Mafia boss guided her to a chair at the glass conference table. These were his captains, she realized, each responsible for different territories, different aspects of the business empire that operated beneath Eureka's tourist-friendly surface. "Gentlemen, meet our new asset," the Mafia boss announced, his tone making the introduction sound like both promotion and warning. The men studied her with calculated assessment, seeing not the waitress in uniform, but someone their leader had deemed valuable enough to protect personally. The oldest among them, silver-haired with scars visible at his collar, spoke first, addressing her directly rather than questioning her presence. The businessman had powerful friends who'll notice his absence. They'll look for someone to blame, someone to punish. Another man spread photographs across the table, surveillance images of 3 well-dressed men arriving at Eureka's small private airstrip that afternoon. His partners from Little Rock, he explained, already asking questions about his sudden disappearance. The Mafia boss remained standing behind her chair, his presence a solid wall between her and potential threats. They'll find nothing but a carefully constructed paper trail leading to gambling debts and poor investments. A man who fled his responsibilities rather than face consequences. A third man, younger than the others, with technology illuminating his tablet screen, detailed financial maneuvers already in motion. His accounts are being systematically emptied through channels that will implicate him in money laundering operations he actually was involved in. She listened with growing understanding as they outlined the comprehensive dismantling of her attacker's life, his reputation, his finances, his very identity being erased and rewritten in ways that would ensure any investigation would find only a criminal who deserved his fate. The silver-haired man addressed her again, respect evident in his direct gaze. "Your role in this narrative must be decided tonight. There are 3 possibilities. You disappear completely with a new identity, you remain as our eyes within the hotel, or you become officially associated with our organization." She felt the weight of each option pressing against her chest, the immensity of the choice before her. The waitress she'd been 3 days ago would have feared these men, this decision, this irrevocable step away from normalcy. But that woman had disappeared the moment she'd sent her desperate text. The Mafia boss's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, neither directive nor possessive. "She needs time," he stated. The simple declaration immediately accepted by men who rarely heard him defer to anyone's needs but his own. As the meeting concluded with assignments distributed and contingencies established, she noticed the subtle dynamics of power, how these dangerous men deferred to their leader not from fear, but from respect earned through consistent behavior. Violence was their currency, but loyalty was their true wealth. They left the penthouse meeting separately, she through the service elevator, he via private stairwell, reuniting in the black sedan 10 minutes later. The separation was strategic rather than symbolic, establishing patterns of caution that would define their unconventional relationship moving forward. She watched Eureka Springs pass outside the window, its quaint tourist facade now transparent to her newly educated eyes. Each charming boutique, each historical landmark, each scenic overlook now revealed its dual purpose, legitimate business fronts masking territorial boundaries in an invisible map of power. Street cameras pivoted slightly as they passed, acknowledging their presence through digital eyes that reported to multiple masters. She noted their positions now with trained awareness, mapping surveillance networks that had always existed just beyond her previous perception. The businessman's former properties displayed subtle signs of transition: security personnel with different postures, delivery schedules altered, cleaning crews arriving at new times. These minute changes would be invisible to tourists, but signaled the transfer of authority to observant insiders. Eureka's police chief nodded respectfully from his patrol car as they passed the courthouse, his casual salute conveying volumes about hierarchy and arrangement. She wondered how many other officials maintained similar understandings with the quiet man beside her, their badges and authority balanced delicately against his influence. Local shopkeepers watched their passage with expressions ranging from nervous deference to calculated neutrality, each reaction revealing their position in the invisible ecosystem. Some had chosen sides long ago, others maintained precarious independence through careful diplomacy. All understood the language of power flowing beneath tourist commerce. The Mafia boss noted her observations with subtle approval, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel when her gaze lingered on particularly significant locations. Her education had already begun, Eureka Springs transforming from scenic postcard town into three-dimensional chessboard where every structure held strategic value. "Your apartment isn't safe tonight," the Mafia boss stated as they drove past her building without slowing. Through the rain-streaked window, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street, the businessman's associates already beginning their search for answers. They returned to the forest cabin through back roads even more circuitous than their earlier route, headlights extinguished for the final approach along the gravel drive. The Mafia boss moved with heightened vigilance, his hand occasionally brushing her elbow to guide her through the darkness. Inside, the cabin had transformed from temporary sanctuary to functional command center, laptops open on the dining table, secure phones charging on countertops, weapons discreetly positioned at strategic points throughout the space. The transition revealed how quickly his world could adapt to changing circumstances. "We leave for Chicago tomorrow if you choose that path," he informed her, preparing coffee with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. "A new identity is already being created. Background, credentials, apartment, employment, everything required for a seamless transition." The offer hung between them: escape, reinvention, protection guaranteed by distance and anonymity. She should have felt grateful for the clean slate many would covet, yet something in her rebelled against disappearing from a life she'd built through years of determined effort. "And if I stay?" she asked, accepting the coffee cup with hands steadier than they'd been 24 hours earlier. The question contained layers she wasn't ready to fully articulate. About Eureka, about the hotel, about the man across from her whose debt had been paid, yet whose protection continued. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes revealed careful consideration. "You become valuable in new ways: information, observation, connection to legitimate businesses. Your education continues in both worlds rather than abandoning one for the other." She recognized the offer for what it was: neither romantic proposition nor business transaction, but something uniquely balanced between them. He was offering partnership rather than ownership, allowing her agency in a world that typically demanded absolute loyalty. Sleep eluded her that night as rain continued its relentless rhythm against the cabin's roof. She stood at the window, watching his security team patrol the perimeter, shadows moving through shadows, their presence reassuring rather than threatening, now that she understood their purpose. Morning arrived with clarity, both in the sky after the storm and in her mind after hours of contemplation. She found him on the porch as before, his posture revealing he'd slept as little as she had, his attention divided between the forest and the secure phone in his hand. "I'm staying," she announced, the decision feeling right as the words left her mouth, "not because I fear starting over elsewhere, but because running would mean he still has power over my choices. I won't give him that satisfaction, even in death." Something softened in the Mafia boss's expression, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement of respect. "Then we begin your true education today," he replied, the simple statement opening doorways to knowledge most never glimpsed, the invisible mechanisms that governed power in places like Eureka Springs. That afternoon, they returned to Hotel Meridian, she in her waitress uniform, he as a guest checking into the presidential suite. To outside observers, they were strangers passing in the ornate lobby, but the brief glance they exchanged contained volumes only they could read. 2 weeks passed in careful choreography. She maintained her shifts at the hotel restaurant, while observing patterns invisible to her before. He conducted business throughout the Ozarks, while maintaining discreet contact through seemingly random interactions that fooled even the most watchful eyes. The businessman's partners departed Eureka after 5 fruitless days, their investigation thwarted by digital breadcrumbs leading to offshore gambling debts and a private flight to Mexico that existed only in falsified records. Their frustration manifested in abrupt checkouts and substantial unpaid minibar tabs. Her apartment received subtle security upgrades, window sensors disguised as decorative trim, cameras camouflaged within vintage light fixtures, reinforced doors with antique hardware that concealed modern locking mechanisms. The improvements preserved the building's historic appearance, while creating an invisible fortress. At the university, she continued her business classes with renewed focus, suddenly understanding practical applications for theoretical concepts as she glimpsed the legitimate side of the Mafia boss's diversified portfolio. Economic principles and market strategies gained clarity when viewed through the lens of territorial expansion and competitor neutralization. Each evening after her shift, a different car would collect her from various locations near the hotel, sometimes a taxi, sometimes a delivery van, sometimes a tourist shuttle, each taking circuitous routes before delivering her to wherever the Mafia boss had established his temporary headquarters that day. Their meetings evolved from security briefings into wide-ranging discussions: strategy, territory, psychology, history. The education he'd promised unfolding in conversations that revealed his intelligence extended far beyond criminal enterprise into a profound understanding of human nature and power dynamics. She learned to shoot with increasing accuracy, to notice surveillance without revealing awareness, to read micro-expressions that betrayed deception, to move through spaces without drawing attention. Each skill built upon her natural talents for observation and adaptation that had first caught his attention. The silver-haired captain became her most frequent instructor, his decades of experience evident in lessons delivered with gruff efficiency and unexpected philosophical insights. "Power isn't about controlling others," he told her during one session. "It's about controlling the space between decisions." She discovered her natural talent for financial analysis during lessons on money movement, quickly identifying patterns in seemingly unrelated businesses that revealed hidden connections. The silver-haired captain nicknamed her the Falcon for her ability to spot irregularities from considerable distance, her perspective offering fresh insights even to veterans. Physical training evolved beyond basic self-defense into specialized skills: lockpicking disguised as jewelry adjustment, surveillance detection masked as casual window shopping, dead drops conducted through seemingly innocent coffee shop interactions. Each technique transformed ordinary movements into potential tools, public spaces into operational theaters. The Mafia boss observed her progress through reports and occasional direct observation, his rare compliments delivered through subtle gestures rather than words, additional resources allocated to her training, access granted to secured information, invitations to strategy sessions normally closed to newcomers. Hotel Meridian's guest records became her research material, her new position providing legitimate access to reservation patterns that revealed valuable intelligence about visiting competitors, political figures, and potential allies. She developed coding systems for flagging significant arrivals without alerting other staff, creating information channels that flowed directly to decision-makers. Eureka's seasonal festivals took on strategic significance, as she recognized their value for legitimate business expansion and territorial reinforcement. Tourist events providing perfect cover for significant meetings, property acquisitions, and competitor assessment. Her suggestions for sponsorship opportunities impressed even the most skeptical captains with their dual-purpose ingenuity. Her first test came when one of the businessman's former associates attempted to bribe her for information about his disappearance. She maintained the cover story with convincing ignorance, while simultaneously photographing the man's identification and vehicle information with techniques recently acquired. The information she provided led to the associate's quiet departure from Eureka Springs the following day, his hotel room left in disarray that suggested hasty evacuation rather than planned checkout. Her successful handling of the situation earned respectful nods from the Mafia boss's inner circle. 1 month after the night in room 407, she received a small package delivered to her apartment. Inside, a delicate silver necklace bearing a single charm shaped like a clock face, permanently marked at 12 minutes past 10. The gift contained no note, needed no explanation. She wore it beneath her uniform shirts, the metal warming against her skin as she moved through her daily routines, with newfound awareness of the dual world she now inhabited. The weight of it became comforting, a constant reminder of the moment her life had pivoted on a desperate text. Hotel Meridian's ownership quietly transferred to a holding company with Chicago connections, management restructured under leadership that treated staff with unexpected respect. Her position evolved from waitress to guest relations coordinator, a title that legitimized her observations of visitors while providing cover for meetings with the Mafia boss. The forest cabin became her weekend sanctuary, a place where she shed both uniforms, both identities, to simply exist in the space between worlds. Sometimes he joined her there, their conversations deepening beyond strategy into philosophy, literature, history, intellectual connection forming bonds stronger than physical attraction could have created. In these quiet moments, she recognized that their relationship defied conventional categories, not lovers, but more than allies, not friends, but bound by something deeper than friendship. They were counterweights maintaining perfect balance, his calculated power complemented by her intuitive understanding, her adaptability enhanced by his unwavering certainty. 6 months after that rainy night, she stood at the window of the presidential suite at Hotel Meridian, watching autumn transform Eureka Springs into a canvas of amber and crimson. Behind her, the Mafia boss concluded a business call, legitimate development plans for a wellness resort utilizing the town's famous thermal springs. Her reflection in the window revealed subtle transformations, confidence in her posture, vigilance in her gaze, purpose in her expression. The waitress uniform had been replaced by tailored business attire, her promotion to hotel management providing perfect cover for her true role within the organization. The businessman's disappearance had faded from local gossip, replaced by excitement about the wellness resort that promised economic revitalization while concealing strategic expansion of territory. Permits that would have taken years were approved in months. Environmental concerns mysteriously resolved without controversy. "Chicago tomorrow," the Mafia boss remarked, joining her at the window without touching, their habitual distance maintained even in private, a boundary that preserved the clarity of their arrangement. "The board expects quarterly updates in person, and your perspective on the hotel operations would be valuable." She considered the invitation, understanding its significance. Chicago represented his power center, his inner sanctum, the place where his authority was absolute rather than carefully cultivated through proxies. Taking her there meant trust beyond what their arrangement strictly required. The Chicago invitation carried professional implications beyond their personal dynamic. Regional management required different skills than local operation, broader strategic thinking, rather than tactical response. Her promotion would shift power balances within the organization, elevating her from protected asset to recognized authority. Her academic transcript had already been transferred to the Chicago University through channels that raised no questions, her scholarship status secured through a foundation with legitimate credentials and discrete connections. Education provided both practical advancement and perfect cover for her increasing organizational involvement. Behind the wellness resort plans lay sophisticated money movement structures she had helped design, her business education combining with street knowledge to create financial architecture that satisfied both legal requirements and organizational needs. The project represented her evolution from observer to architect within their dual world. The silver-haired captain had given her his personal endorsement for Chicago, a rare honor conveyed through a vintage fountain pen left on her desk, with his family crest etched into the silver cap. The gift acknowledged her transition from student to colleague, the pen itself containing compartments for microfilms accessible only to those who knew its secrets. Their journey to Chicago would coincide with a regional summit of legitimate business leaders, providing natural cover for organizational gatherings beneath the surface of economic development conferences. Her hotel management credentials would grant access to exclusive events while justifying her presence among power brokers, 20 years her senior. "There's a university there with an excellent business program," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "Credits would transfer seamlessly if you decided to complete your degree while overseeing the hotel's integration into our hospitality division." The offer contained layers: continued education, expanded responsibilities, deeper involvement in legitimate operations, proximity to him in his natural environment, rather than this border territory where his presence required constant vigilance. Each layer presented both opportunity and complication. Her phone vibrated with a news alert. Another hotel in the region changing ownership. Another piece on the invisible chessboard shifting position. She recognized the pattern now, could anticipate 3 moves ahead based on territories and resources, could identify weakness in business structures before they became acquisition targets. "I'll need to maintain appearances here periodically," she replied, the decision forming even as she spoke. "The local connections are valuable, and sudden complete relocation would generate unnecessary questions." Her strategic thinking had evolved to match his, pragmatic, thorough, forward-looking. His expression revealed approval, not of her decision, but of her reasoning process, her consideration of operational security, even while embracing new opportunities. This had become the foundation of their relationship, mutual respect for competence, for intellect, for the ability to navigate complexity. That evening, they dined at a small restaurant on the outskirts of town, a rare public appearance together, justified by their official business relationship. Over candlelight, they discussed architectural plans for the wellness resort, their conversation appearing ordinary to observers while containing coded updates on territorial expansions. She noticed a woman at a corner table watching them with too casual interest, her tourist attire slightly too perfect, her camera positioned too deliberately on the table. Without changing expression, she shifted her water glass to signal the observation to the Mafia boss. His response was imperceptible to anyone but her, a slight adjustment of his cufflink that acknowledged receipt of her warning while signaling non-immediate threat. Their nonverbal communication had developed into a language as fluent as spoken words, more secure than encrypted messages. The following morning, they departed separately. He in the black sedan headed directly to the private airstrip, she in her own car toward her apartment to pack essentials for the Chicago trip. The separation maintained operational security while acknowledging their paths would converge at their destination. As she packed clothing suitable for Chicago's cooler climate, she touched the clock charm at her throat, a gesture that had become habitual in moments of transition. 12 minutes had changed everything, connecting her to a man who operated in shadows yet had brought her into unexpected light. Thank you for following this story to its conclusion. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected connection and transformation, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want more stories where danger and protection intertwine in the space between heartbeats. Your support makes it possible for me to continue crafting these moments where lives change in just 12 minutes.